Good evening, everyone. Good morning, Professor Emanuele. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021 and 22. This is Rudranarayan Das, Executive Director, Center for ADIVASI Research and Development. We are proud to announce that this conference is conducted along with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. I welcome our speaker for today, Professor Emanuele, and participants across the globe who are watching us through Facebook and YouTube Live. And a few people are here to listen to Professor Emanuele. The broader theme of this conference is AGNOTOLOGICAL context, disciplinary practices of social sciences and policy frames. On behalf of Center for ADIVASI Research and Development, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Sanjay Kumar Nayak, respected Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, Professor Mahadev Joyswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, and Professor Sharat Kumar Palita, respected Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha. The convener of this largest ongoing virtual event, eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahi. Ladies and gentlemen, the main outcome of this conference is to come up with a national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID-19. We hope this conference would help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best in the future. Dear friends, the Center for ADIVASI Research and Development is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research for engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe is facing today. The prime agenda of this institution is to come up with potential policy solutions for social change, while believing in the idea of debate, dialogue, discussion, and with expertise, experiencing, and education. The institution focuses on marginalized communities and work for their livelihood to protect the nature, culture, language, and identity in particular. The age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomena for societal purpose to enhance knowledge. Our information work for them is methodical and avoids paradoxically frameworks which is neglected so many centuries from theory to become practice. Ladies and gentlemen, our center sincerely believes in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and builds new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism to glorify generations to come. Center for ADIVASI Research and Development come to serve with the holistic approach of critical thinking in education to fill the gaps and to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities, for beneficiaries, directing self-reflecting global self-societies. Dear friends, in this session of World Human Sciences and Management Conference, we have with us one of the very important philosopher and professor of ethics. He's basically from Italy. He's none other than Professor Emanuele. Professor Emanuele is a Jewish priest. He was born in Rome and now lives in Naples. He is actually a professor of ethics in the Faculty of Theology of the city of Naples. He attended his PhD in the Jewish Faculty of Philosophy in Paris with a thesis about generative ethics. After his generativity remained his main field of research. To his topic, he devoted many essays: Migration and Modernity, a Generation Reading, Peripheries from Heterotopy to Regeneration, 2019, Drives and Bonds, Philosophical Approaches to Sexuality, 2021. He's also very active in the field of conflict mediation, according to the humanistic approach of Jacqueline Marino. So we are very happy to host you, sir. Without taking much time, I would like to invite you. Your present topic of today's symposium is Deconstructing Institutions, a way to regenerate our societies. Over to you, Professor Emanuele. Please start your talk.
Thank you very much for this introduction and this presentation. I am very pleased to meet you all, and I will develop, of course, my topic in English language. You will excuse me if my pronunciation is not always perfect, but I'll try at least to give you clear conceptualization of all the main passages of my speech. According to the introduction, we don't know yet each other, but now you are aware that my main field of research concerns the object of generative theory. Generative theory comes from psychoanalysis in the middle 20th century, and I tried in my researches to upgrade this concept, not in the psychoanalytic research, but in the field of moral philosophy. So we are going to develop even some ethical themes in this presentation that you can hear since the beginning in the title. So we have Deconstructing Institutions, a way to regenerate our society. So the theme of the regeneration, of course, is one of the core concepts of the generative theory. Anyway, the main concern of my topics at this moment is to study the conditions of transition and change of any institution. I am very interested in institutional life, and I discovered that as a necessity of our modernity for the time that we are living now. I'm not going to center my reflection in the field of political thinking, even if I cannot avoid to take some concepts and to confront myself with them. But I am going to propose you a deep philosophical reflection. The deconstruction, this important word that I put on the title of this topic, of course, is a testimony of this philosophical depth that I will try to honor in my speech. So we will go across a problematization of the institution and institutional life. And I'm going to touch, of course, some concept of the degenerative theory, which are important to understand in which sense I understand the institutional life. For example, the concept of bond, the having bond with each other, it's very important for the generative theory. The bond has a main role in institutional life, how to keep a bond, how to give birth to a bond, and how to regenerate a bond. So those are just some concepts that we are going to work on. Which is the problem that give the main input to my presentation today? The pretext of this topic, it is a statement of the philosopher of the 20th century, Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre says in one of his most important book, namely Critique of the Dialectic Reason, Critique de la Raison Dialectique, the first book of this publication, he used to say that an institution is a system of fixed relationship. Why is he adopting this kind of language about institution? Why is he speaking about fixation? He used to say that the institution is a sort of contradiction of what gives birth to an institution itself. For example, institution used to take place, to raise during moment, for example, of revolution, during moment of change, during moment of social movements. They used to take place, they used to raise as a fixation of this movement that give them birth. So this is very interesting for me because by my side, by the generative point of view, I don't used to think that the moment of raising of an institution is a moment of fixation and of stagnation in a certain sense. So this is the question that I'm going to develop for you, and I will give you now a little scheme of my presentation. How can stagnation be the fruit of something that is changing? How can fixation be the fruit of something which is in movement, in permanent movement? The plan, so I'm going to give you the plan of my presentation, which consists in 3 main steps. In a first moment, I will try to explain to you, to give an account and a definition about the issue of time, in which sense an institution and an institutional life is concerned by the issue of time. Secondly, I will try to explain in few words. I'm not going to develop that in details, but I will try to explain in few words what is generative approach that is the main inspiration of my researches and of my thinking, actually, at least. And this presentation, generative approach, will lead us to a sort of reformulation of the problem. So I just mentioned the first moment of the problematization, this statement of Jean-Paul Sartre: the institution is a system of fixed relationship. And so you will assist in the second step, the second main step of this presentation, to a reformulation of this statement in order to have a better understanding of it. Finally, I will try to conclude if a conclusion is always possible. I don't know if it is possible, but I will try to give some lines or inputs of conclusion in an ethical sense. So the third step of this conference, of this topic, will be to give you an ethical perspective on institutional renovation. I confess to you that maybe the main I stressed in the development of this topic the word deconstruction and institution. It's a little bit less stressed the idea of how all this is going to renew our societies, but we can have some points to understand the eventual development in this line. Of course, all that I'm going to share with you is open, is not concluded in itself. So I'm not only here to give you my point of view or to share with you my thoughts. I'm also here to receive you from you some suggestions to go ahead in my work of research. And so in this sense, thank you. And this is what I think and what I'm going to develop for you. So first step, let us really start with the development of this topic. And I promised you to give an account about the definition of time. In which sense time is connected with the issue of the institution. Which kind of time? I used to understand institution as a moment, as a mean that we give each other to have a stabilization, to stabilize a given experience, to give continuity to this experience. Which kind of experience? For example, we used to understand an experience in this term. An experience can be a bond, again, this word, a bond that we have with someone. For example, in a sense of marriage, in a sense of association, in a sense of friendship, to be in bond, to be in relationship with someone. What is an institution? Is a way to give a stability and a public visibility to this kind of commitment that we have to each other. Stabilization and continuity. This is a sort of formal interpretation, of course, of the institution, but it is a way to face up with the issue of time. In which sense? In the sense of give a continuity to something that we are experiencing now. How can we go on in time in the future with this bond? How can we keep it alive? This is the answer to this question can be raising an institution, institutionalizing this kind of bond. So we have two consequences to this approach, namely that the stability of this institution, of this bond that we have with someone else, It's a sort of guarantee in the sense of the repetition and the reiteration of the same experience. Let us think not only in strict terms of bond, but for example, of social action. How can we give a future to the social action that we are leading? How can we give a stability and a future to the values in which we believe today, for example? So the institution is an answer to this. Stability, repetition in time, reiteration, and thirdly, we have another consequence. Maybe there is a microphone which is on. If you can put it off, it would be better to follow. Okay, because I hear voices. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. So I was saying that the third consequence of this position about institution, this very basic position, is that institution can represent a point of reference in our society because they are elements that give stability to the society, even if this stability concerns just a little part of the society and not the entire society, according, of course, to the dimension of the institution itself. Okay, this is just the very beginning of the problem that I'm trying to raise, facing the issue of time. A first series of consideration. Let us move ahead. So when we are having an experience, let me say an interesting experience with someone else, with a group, with friends, with an association, with whatever, we have normally, very schematically speaking, we have two possibilities in front of us. The first one is to remain at the degree of an informal relationship. So let us remain as we are, as friends, just in an informal being, in an informal way of being together. Okay, no rules, no public, no official commitments. Let us remain as we are. But we have, of course, I already anticipated that we can think about a higher state of recognized relationship, namely, excuse me if I repeat that so much, namely, let us found a new institution. Let us give to us a formal shape to our being together, to our way of being together. Let us move to, as we move to the institution, we move to a political element. So let us move to political, let us keep in touch with political science, because when we move to this political recognition, political means public, means it concerns the polis, the city, the environment, the civil environment around us. So when we go to this higher state of recognition of public and political and social recognition, we are crossing a very special step that, philosophically speaking, I would call in this way. We are crossing an ontological threshold because we are moving into a new existence. We are moving into a new shape, an official one, a public one. To be in relationship, when we are alone, when we are a little group, when we are in an informal situation, we don't need to give an account of what we do, unless it is very, very bad, we can say. But if we have an institutional acknowledgement, of course, we must be able to give an account of what we do, even for, if necessary, for little things, for little events, because public life, institutional life needs that, asks for that, and it is of course a structural element. We must be able to give an account of what we do, of what we decide in front of the rest of the society. Why? Because we are an institution. We have chosen to move ahead in this ontological threshold that makes us a public, an institutional, an objective reality. So something which is clear and joinable from the rest for the rest of the society. Because when we are an institution for the others. We are not an institution just for ourselves. There is always a value, there is always an implication of sharing in an institutional choice. So we have this ontological threshold that we have moved ahead, and we are in this situation. Why time? Again, second remark about the issue of time. Now I can be more precise. We had a first definition. Time is a way to give continuity to a choice, to a value, to an experience. Now time has another acception, another meaning. Time is a before institutionalization and after institutionalization. Time is a sort of mark, is a sort of threshold. The threshold is not always not only a geographical or spatial reality. It's a reality in time also. It's a line in time that divides past from present and future. Now we are different than what we were before this choice of institutionalization. The problem, let us raise another problem now concerning time, and I'm going to give you more precisions about this issue that I'm raising at the very beginning of my speech, because a very serious problem, and you will discover it more clearly in my further clarifications. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, according to different tastes, the relationship with the time in institution is much more complex than what I just said. Is much more difficult, not only to understand, but to live. In which sense? Because there is at least a second problem that we can raise, which consists in the question, in the kind of issues and problems that time raises, not from outside the relationship, give a public account of what we are and what we do. But there are a lot of issues that the question of time, a certain understanding of time, is able to raise from within our institution. There are problems concerning outside, the relationship with other institutions or with the world outside institution, and there are problems within. In which sense? In the kind of bonds that we are able to create among us, in the sense that we are exposed to the ups and downs of a relationship, in the sense that the fact of being an institution, the fact of giving a continuity, a stability, a reiteration, a possible reiteration to a beautiful experience, let me say, it doesn't mean that we are not going to have any kind of problem because of the same experience. Why? Because the bond that we are able to create among us is not able to remain exactly the same over time. Is going to change, is going to cross crisis, is going to cross diminutions, is going in terms of motivation, in terms of engagement, in terms of any kind of difficulties that people that used to be together have. So let me give another last clarification about the sense of this problematic of time. I just said that maybe you have heard a weird expression by my side, which is the following. I am going to repeat that for you in order to connect better my speech, my presentation. I just used the expression that time is able to ask question to us, is able to ask question from outside and from inside. What does it mean? I'm not simply personifying, I'm not in a sort of novel, I'm not making novels here, just making a personification of time. Time is not someone, I cannot make an attribution to time of an action which is typical of a human being, isn't it? But I used this expression. Time is able to ask us, to give problems to us. Now I'm going to explain this. in which sense time is a problem for an institutional bond, for a bond in general, and for an institutionalized bond. So let me explain you that, again, it can happen to me, it happens to every one of us, certainly, that we have good experiences with someone, with a girlfriend, with a boyfriend, with a group, a religious experience, or whatever kind of experience. And at the very beginning, when I am just tasting the beginning of this experience, I also see that there is an alternance, that there are differences when I am with the people that I am, the people of this experience, when I am with her, when I am with them, when I am with him, when I am with God. If we can make a theological, a spiritual experience, of course, I am happy. I am in a state of consolation. I am fine. I am good. Everything is okay when I am in this experience. But when this experience stops and I have to go back home, in between commas, when I have to get far from those people, from my girlfriend, from my boyfriend, from whoever, I feel this this other spirit that is inspiring me, which is a spirit of sadness. There is an alternance. These ups and downs of this at the very beginning. Sometimes I feel very happy when I am with them. When I am far from them, I am not happy. I'm unhappy. I am upset. I'm sad, isn't it? So the good taste that gives to me this beautiful experience gives to me also a souvenir, a memory of this experience. The memory of this experience gives to me also a desire of having it again and again. Am I having a good spiritual experience, a good theological experience with the church, with the mosque, with any kind of spiritual experience? Okay, so I nourish the desire of it. I feel the desire of it. I want to repeat. I want it again and again. I want more of it. So this happens because beautiful experiences used to give us a sense of fullness, of satisfaction. And when we have this kind of satisfaction, this sense of fullness, of course, we have the intention to give to this experience a continuity, to have a continuation of them over time. So let us go back. So we are again in the field of institutionalization of it. But it arrives exactly the opposite sensation that we can have, namely, we can face at the same time as we face the beautiful moment of this consolation, of this experience, we have bad experience. The bad experience, I call that the absence of it. When I'm fine, when I am with them, when I am with her, when I am with God, and so on, I am happy because I am in presence of them. We are together and we go ahead together. So let us face life in this sense, in this form. But when we are distant, when we are in crisis, when we are facing time in the sense of ups and downs of our relationship, when we have troubles, when we are no more so convinced as we were at the beginning, we are facing another problem that we used to share, to live in the question of time, namely the issue of the absence. The absence is what I call the problematic time now. And that's why I titled this intervention with the name of deconstruction, because if you are familiar with the issue of deconstruction, the absence is one of the main concepts that this French philosopher Jacques Derrida used to give an account to his theory, to his concept of deconstruction. But let us go ahead. So, what is the problem that I'm going to face, that I'm going to discuss more for you, is this issue of the absence. So institutional life can be a problem, can be in trouble when the issue of time in terms of absence of the other raises within it. Okay? Let us move to the second part. No, so I have given a complete now, I think at least, a complete definition, a complete presentation of the problems that I am in front of it, that I am in front of. So let us go now toward a reformulation in terms of the generative theory, because we want to, if we have the intention to go ahead, maybe we need to take in our reflection, to call in our reflection new concepts in order to give another point of view on the same situation. So we have the problem of time in the sense of the problem of an absence, okay? Ups and downs of a bond, of each kind of bond. Now I give you a very short presentation because time is running and I want to hear also from you. I am giving to you a very short presentation, not an entire presentation of the meaning of the generative approach. Of course, it is a huge, it would need an entire conference for it to present you this generative approach. But I decided to use that, not to present it, but to use it for this topic. Which part of the generative thinking I'm going to use to solve the problem of institutional life as I constructed it, as I presented it right now. So in the generative approach is simply a movement. I already mentioned that in a certain sense, because it is the movement of institutionalization from a bond to an institutional bond. So the generative ethics and the generative thinking is a theory that I create myself in a certain sense, that I'm trying to develop to explain this movement of institutionalization of human realities, of what deserves to be institutionalized. Of course, not everything is deserves or is interesting to be institutionalized. So in this passage, in this whole concept, in this whole theory, I try to make a sort of list of characteristics, of main characteristics of a bond. There is one characteristic which is very important for us now, which can give an account of the problem, which can give an input more to our problem, which is the following. Every bond can be reversible. Is the reversibility of the bond. Why are we speaking of time in terms of ups and downs of a bond? Why are we can say that our relationship is in shape when we are okay, when we are happy with each other, when we are fine at work, in our bond of collaboration with our institution, for example, with our work, with our professional life, when we are happy together. Yes, but there can be moments in which this bond, even if the contract is solid, even if the contract remains interesting, this bond can be unbound, can be separated. Bond means the two realities which are of the same kind to human beings. Of course, I used to speak about bonds between or among human beings. As we are able to bind each other, it is possible that we can make the opposite operation, that we can be separated, because the bond is reversible. This is a problem. I've taken a lot of time to understand this in my researches. Maybe it was already clear for other scholars, for other researchers of the generative theory. For me, it's quite new because I realized that very recently. But I think that is very interesting to be aware of that characteristic of the bond, because it is a sort of key concept, of key idea that can give an important clarification to our problem. Because if we know that every bond, every important experience, So every important value in which we believe and that keeps us together, that keeps us in the same society, in the same spirit, in the same mood, can be defeated in a certain sense, by time, by distance, by proofs, by absence of the other. It means that we don't have to be surprised if sometimes in all the things that we used to that we believe and that are very important for us, we don't have to be surprised if they are going to cross a crisis, because it is natural, it is connatural for the reality of the bond itself. So that's why I am introducing you in this conceptualization, in this vocabulary of the generative theory. Let us go ahead. Let us go ahead for what I promised to you. Now I'm going to give you an account of a reformulation of the problem, so that the second step has been very, very, very fast. Let us reformulate. So now the reformulation. I'm going to face the second main step of my presentation now, which is my hypothesis. My work hypothesis is the following. I believe in the possibility for the regeneration of our society lies within his deconstruction, id est, within the structural reversibility of a bond. Again, I repeat, because it is important. It's a very it's a very important point. The possibility for regeneration of our society and of our institutions lies within his deconstruction, id est, within the structural reversibility of the bond on which they are founded. Okay, I explain, and then I try to solve, moving on to the third step of this presentation. What is deconstruction? I think that we have to be clear about the meaning of this word, because it is very important. We cannot just use that as a synonym of destruction, as a synonym of dismantling. I am going to dismantle, I'm going to destruct something. No, because deconstruction is not something that I can do. It's not a possible action that I can perform myself. Why? There is all the commentators, and Derrida himself used to say that deconstruction is not a list of deconstruction is not. What is not deconstruction? Deconstruction is not a demolition. Again, I already said that. It's not a process of dismantling something. It's not an analysis. Deconstruction is not a critique. Deconstruction is not a methodology. Deconstruction is not an operation controlled by a subject. It's not a methodology. It's not an entity. It's not something like an individual, or like a pencil, like a lamp, like a physical object. Here is the definition, a definition which is not a real definition, but you will excuse this paradoxal statement that I'm going to do. Deconstruction just takes place. In words of Derrida, deconstruction is something that happens, simply happens. Elle a lieu. This is the French sound of this statement, of this definition. Deconstruction just takes place. Deconstruction happens especially to everything that has ambition to close itself from the outside and inside events. Deconstruction is everything that happens to us when we are sure, when we are convinced that we can preserve ourselves from, again, time, in all the meanings that I gave it to you, that I've given to you. Okay, when I am sure, when I am convinced, when I want assurances that I won't preserve my life as it is now, So deconstruction is a sort of, is a way of saying, is a way of expressing this this reality, that we can sure that things cannot remain as they are. Why? Because time passes, again, according to all the explication that I've given you before. Time, deconstruction, absence, ups and downs, to bind and unbind. This is time. In this sense, this is a way of understanding time. So we cannot protect ourselves from time. This is one of the main statements. It's not the only one, of course. The deconstruction is much wider than what I'm saying now, but it is just the part of deconstruction that I use for have a better understanding of our institutional life. Derrida defines his condition of a structural, excuse me, this is a bit not very easy word, a structural non-closure. What does it mean? The deconstruction is a structural openness to an outside. So Derrida means with this word of deconstruction that we are structurally opened to all the contingencies of the world of outside of our life. It means that we cannot have a full protection from any kind of contingencies, from any kind of ups and downs of our relationship. Simply, why? Because now you understand maybe better the formulation. You cannot preserve yourself from deconstruction because deconstruction simply takes place. It takes place. So you have to welcome it, if you can, as it comes, as it is. What to do? So now I think we have another step of comprehension of the problems, because we touched maybe the conceptual definition of the problematic that I'm trying to raise, that I named reversibility. Reversibility, structural openness, deconstruction, to be open to the outside, to the dehors. It's the French word, it sounds like that. We have the basic condition. And in front of this basic condition, in front of this conceptualization, now we are free to move to the last step of my presentation, the third one, and to answer to the following question. So in front of this situation that uses to take place in our institution. Why? Because our institutions are founded on a bond as any kind of relationship. Institution, in a certain sense, let me add a sort of a little footnote. Institution as a sort, you can understand it as a sort of synonym of bond. Bond and institutions are strictly connected, as are two broader concepts with the same DNA. Yes, sorry if my English is not very clear. They have the same structure. I mean this. Okay, I hope it is clear. Anyway, in front of this problem, in front of this situation, what to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to understand? Even here, in front of the reversibility of our relationships, we have two possibilities. Before, we have the possibility, let us move to an institutional form, shape of our relationship. Let us marry. Let us sign a contract. Let us do something in a public sphere. Okay. Or the other possibility was, let us remain as we are in an informal situation, in an informal bond. Okay. Let us remain just in friendship, and so we go ahead as we can. Okay. Now we have another choice that we can do. We have another decision that we have to take. We can follow an undeconstructed hermeneutics, an undeconstructed interpretation, in the sense we can reject all this, or we can follow a deconstructed hermeneutics and a deconstructed interpretation of this dilemmatic situation, what to do in front of the reversibility of our bonds, what to do in front of that. We can follow the deconstruction and his rules, so to respect and to welcome it in our life, in our ethical discernment, or we can reject it. If we reject it, I will be very short on that because it's not my intention to develop this possibility, of course, maybe you understood that already. To reject this means that we are going to remain indebted with another very important principle in political philosophy and in ethical theory, political and ethical theory, which is that we are dominated by a principle of power. If I reject deconstruction, if I reject the possibility of being in crisis in my fundamental relationships, in the relationships that gives to me the identity that I have, it means that I am adopting vis-a-vis myself and vis-a-vis others, of course, an attitude of power, of domination, of strength, because I want to be strong where it is impossible and it is a nonsense to be strong in front of it, in front of the deconstruction. So I reject, and I find myself in a situation like this, everything or nothing. So in a situation characterized by extremes, okay? On the other side, if I follow the hermeneutics, the interpretation of the deconstruction, if I try to understand, to have a better understanding of this situation, and I go deeper in it, I try to follow this line, even if, of course, is the more difficult one, because I have problems, I have to face problems for which I don't have real solutions. There are no real solutions, or if they are, I have not found it, so I cannot share this. But what I found is that there are a lot of ethical intuitions and attitudes that can be very helpful for us to face this kind of situation, and in the sense of be respectful of the weakness of the others and our same weakness when we are in troubles, when we are in crisis, and of motivations and whatever. I'm going to conclusions because I see the time is running. What are the ethical principles that we can adopt in face of this paradoxal situation, but paradoxal but very realistic situation of the deconstruction of the crisis of our bonds? We have to pay attention. First, we have to understand it. So we have to pay attention to the blind spots, to the ellipses, to the excesses, to the contradictions, to all the little noises that are already present at the moment in which we are signing our contract, in which we are institutionalizing our relationship. We need to be very careful to all these details that make some confusion, that brings some confusion, even at the very beginning. On the average, we are motivated to do that. So we go ahead, we sign, and we go ahead through an institution. But at a certain time, all these little noises can come up again. They can return to our conscience and to our life. What to do? We have to know them. We have to understand them. We have to be respectful vis-a-vis them, vis-a-vis those difficulties. Because deconstruction can be intended as the process between the saturation and emptying of our realities that are not able to fit together. A consequence, excuse me, the formulation I've read it is not very clear. I am going to explain it better. Deconstruction is going to make manifest, to reveal to us another element of our institutional life. The institutional life is made by a lot of elements, a lot of instances, issues, etc., that are not able to fit perfectly together in the sense, namely, this kind of, the bonds, you heard me to repeat a lot of time, but we are invited, thanks to deconstruction and thanks to the generative theory, of course, to seriously consider that our bonds are not perfect. Even if we try to to make them stable, to make them consistent, to make them important, to make them strong, to cover them with insurances is not enough to face the deconstruction of the bond. This is the main teaching of all this. Why? Because I repeat, our institutional life is full of elements that are not able to fit perfectly together. Our bonds are not perfect, cannot be perfect. This is one of the ideas that I bring to your attention. Consequences, and I'm going to finish. Three kinds of consequences. So three kinds of suggestions that I give to you for a further discussion. There is a suggestion, an ethical suggestion that I make in terms of cognition, our intelligence. There is a second suggestion that I made in terms of the comprehension of yourself, the comprehension of the self. So it's an anthropological concern. Thirdly, there is a concern, an ethical concern, according to criteria, ethical criteria of choice. Let us give some points of description for each one of them. In terms of cognition, what deconstruction and generativity teach us? They teach us to be, again, respectful with problems, gaps, and irreconcilable elements. Everything that cannot fit perfectly together. Be respectful, be conscious about that. It is an intellectual conversion in which we try to understand them differently. The fact that they cannot fit perfectly together, it means that at a certain time, maybe we have to reformulate our way of being together. Maybe, of course, we cannot cross moment in which our relationship is broken, so we are separated. We are far from each other. But the fact that we can be separated means that we can invent another kind of bond. We can get in touch, we can get into institution and in our agreement, yeah, why not? In a different way. Reversibility is a condition for renovation. This is an issue, what Aristotle used to call dianoethical virtue. It means the virtue of the intelligence. We have to understand to be virtuous in a cognitive sense. In the sense we have to understand better. There is a virtue for intelligence, for our wisdom. Secondly, a different comprehension of ourself, of the self. Here again, new virtues. We have to deep new virtues. We don't only have to deep courage, as in the ancient classical ethical theory, not only courage, not only justice, not only wisdom. They are important, of course. But we also need, in the deconstruction time, to be patient, the virtue of patience, to be reconciliated, to be respectful. We have to be ethically open to the otherness. Don't be afraid of difference. This is a sort of conversion of the self. In which sense? Because I am trying to raise an attitude, an ethical attitude. Okay? In a third sense, in a third moment of this ethical proposition, there is a criterion of flexibility. You need to clarify. So it's not enough to say that you have to be open to the new, that you have to welcome the deconstruction as it is, because it's not true. You cannot welcome everything that enters into your relationships, because it can be a disaster. So in this sense, you have to give, I think, Derrida doesn't say that, I say that myself. If you want to follow the intensity of the spirit of deconstruction in a generative sense, you need to give limits to deconstruction, in the sense that you must be aware, you need to be aware of the limits, of the extremes, of the news that your relationships and your institutions can bear. You cannot bear whatever kind of change in your relation, in your institutional life, or in your personal life. because there can be experiences, there can be inputs from outside that could be able to destroy completely what you're living, your experience. So in a certain sense, of course, you need to arm yourself with a criterion, an ethical criterion, which gives limits to this. So you cannot think the renovation of an institution, of any kind of bond, in unlimited term. You need to give a shape, to give margins to this action, to the action of deconstruction. Otherwise, everything will be destroyed, because you cannot grow even in a deconstructional terms and attitude in a wild sense. You cannot leave deconstruction growing wild in your life. You cannot leave time make his action of reversibility or absence or whatever without giving to it some limits. Otherwise, the institution itself is a nonsense. Everything must be limited. So we need not only a virtue of the intelligence, of the cognition, and of our ethical attitude, but also of our ethical discernment. How many news can we welcome in our life? How many deconstruction? We have to limit the action of deconstruction. In which sense, and it is the conclusion line, and I really on the conclusion, in which sense, so we can understand this in a generative sense, as ethics of the generative ethics, ethics of the regeneration of our societies and of our institutions. We can think about commitment, we can think about generosity, and we can think about patience. Okay, we are already aware about that. But I used to express all this with a sentence that I took from another French psychanalyst, which is Jacques Lacan. Jacques Lacan, that gives a very beautiful definition. It's not his own definition, but is a definition of love. The definition of Lacan, of love that gives Lacan is to love someone is to give what you don't have, to give to him what you don't have. What does it mean? I think this is the core of the generative attitude, because in life, when we face time, we used to face something that we are not prepared to do. If you want, I can explain that with a story, but now I have no time. I can take it after if you are interested to it. We used to face situations for which we are not prepared. Every trouble that we used to meet in life, normally we are not prepared to that. There is not a school, there is not a university that prepares us to face all the troubles that we can have according to our relationship, to our institutional life, or whatever. So we used to face something that we are not able to control. I say that with just one word. Are we able to control death, for example? Excuse me, it's very strong. But the death is the main thing, the main reality in front of which we have no power, because death is stronger, as deconstruction is stronger. The side of the deconstruction is about death, of course. So what to do to be generative in front of it? Say yes to what you cannot control, according to all the principles that we have given before. But the main character, when you are desiring something, the main character of your desire, the main character is you, is yourself, because you take the initiative of whatever. But in times of regeneration, in times of deconstruction, the main character is not you, is the other. So leave to the other your place if you want to regenerate your life, your institution, and your social environment. I think that I finished. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very enlightening and very wonderful deliberation. Now I would like to invite Dr. Nupur Patnaik to go for a quick comment, please.
Thank you, Dr. Bikram. I think we have some questions in the chat box. There is a question from Ranvijay Kumar. He has a question that we always try to work on the bond which affects individually or in a limited area. Why intellectuals are not working on effective universal bond so that we overcome many existing issues related to morals or others. So he has this question for Professor Emanuele.
Yep.
So, sir, would you please respond this thing or now?
A point of methodology that can be very helpful for me. Normally, I understand English and questions and whatever. If you want to make a question orally, please speak slow so I can distinguish each word. Otherwise, as you suggested, Dr. Nupur, you can write that down. So it will be perfect for me. And if I don't understand, I ask. In this case, if you want, I can try to give some reactions to this question of Kumar Ranvijay.
Ranvijay Kumar is asking, sir. I think he is trying to ask that what is this particular concept of why intellectuals are not working on this deconstructing institutions so that they can deconstruct and reconstruct in a better way. So why there is a less research on this particular issue? Yeah. He is asking. He is a student, so a master degree student. So he is asking this one.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. I try to give a reaction about it. I don't have a clear position about that. For my understanding, according to what I understand of philosophy and of philosophical research now, so I can speak about what I know. This is, in Europe at least, since the 50s, more or less, 50s, 60s, those are the years in which, for example, deconstruction took place, but not only, because those are the years in which the most important philosophers of the 20th century in Europe grew together, philosophers and theologians. I also know some theologians of that generation. Those are philosophers that are still influencing our way of thinking philosophy, theology, and human sciences sometimes. What's happening? Since the 50s, after the Second World War in Europe, we have lost the capacity, the interest of thinking universally. We are facing a moment, we are facing a kind of reflection, of philosophical, of intellectual reflection, in which we discovered, in a certain sense, that all the universal systems to which we were used before the Second World War, intellectually speaking, could be considered, so it's not a strong statement that I'm going to do, but could be considered as something, as a presence of power within our lives. What I mean with that, the presence of a universal, if I am going to reflect about a universal, it means that there are no exceptions possible. If I think about the bond, so I can use that example for you. If I think about a bond in terms of a universal, in a universal term, conceptually speaking, it means that can be no exception about that. What happens if I don't want to be bound with anybody? If I don't want, for example, to be institutionally bound with anyone, it seems, in a certain sense, is not possible even now, even right now, because you cannot be, for example, that you have no bonds with any institution, because you always belong to a state. So a civil bond, a political bond, is always present in our life. You cannot say that you have no passport, because you need a passport in a certain sense to exist politically, because if you don't have political existence, you don't have rights, you don't have local rights in a certain sense. So you need an anchorage, a point of in which you grab the earth, you grab the political network of institution that we used to call the state, the nation states. You need to belong to something. Okay, this is a universal, but these kind of theories are problematic in the sense that they don't welcome exceptions. I cannot use, for example, the idea of marriage as a universal. It's not a universal because not all people are made to be in couple, to marry with someone else. They are not able for any kind of reason. Even myself, I am a priest myself. I am a Catholic priest. I cannot think about the bond with a girl, with a lady, with a wife. Why? Because I've made another choice. Okay, so it's not a universal. I cannot consider this. It is a main choice, of course. For example, in our society, a lot of people used to follow this line, but it is not a universal. As we prefer, we need to prefer to think about the weakness of all our institutionalized realities, because it helps us to understand our social and institutional life in a less oppressive way. We were oppressed, intellectually speaking, by a lot of universal must that used to circulate in the European and debate in the 50s. So we've left them behind. For example, there was a lot of norms of universals about sexuality. All the sexual revolution that we crossed since it was already in the middle of the 2 world wars, but it came out very strongly in the 60s with the 68 revolution. Maybe you've heard about that, the 68 movements and so on. Sexuality crossed a very important moment because it was a moment of undoing all the universal heritage with the models of the past. According to a universal way of understanding sexuality, for example, to understand homosexuality, transsexuality, queer, and any kind of gender troubles, if we want to quote Judith Butler's main work on this topic, would have been a very huge problem, because you are not allowed in the institutional network that were present at that time. So deinstitutionalizing, de-universalizing all these kind of universal concepts is a way to be more open, conceptually speaking, to a pluralistic world. Otherwise, we would be not only bound but tied to the traditional way of doing, not the tradition in the high sense, but the tradition in the sense of customs. And I think that according to the time that we are living, we cannot remain linked to old views of living our important relationships. That's why I am familiar with that, but I am not convinced that I really can use a universal concept in this kind of speech. I don't know if it's clear what I said. Hopefully, yes.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think Ranvijay Kumar has got his answer. First of all, I would like to thank you, sir, for your excellent deliberation over here, coming long way and describing about this particular aspect of deconstructing institutions, a way to regenerate our societies. As there are a lot of students who are gathered over here, from different social sciences discipline, and social institution is a very important aspect, or in their syllabus they have this social institution, and a very unique idea, that is deconstructing institutions, a way to regenerate. So here, sir, you have given a very excellent interpretation on deconstructing. Usually deconstructing, people, you have cleared the doubt also, like deconstructing means destroying, usually people think, but that is not the thing. Deconstructing means the way we analyze the institution. For example, if we take the example of maybe the family, maybe the society today, maybe many various institutions like educational institution, health institution, maybe you gave the example of marital institutions also, how we, and religious also, basically being a priest and also a teacher from this particular background, you have tried to explain this. So how these institutions, we as the people, how with the span of time, due to the temporalities of the societies and the time, with the time, we also don't like some of the aspects of the institution. We always have a deconstructing aspect to this. We usually don't accept the concept of marriage, maybe the religion aspect, or some way we have doubts regarding that. We want it in our own ways. So, and this deconstruction gives way for reconstruction, and it is very much necessary today. And today, as we live in the pandemic times, here we have this thing that pandemic has changed the way we are looking at everything. Like this particular example of webinar, a part of the educational institution we never had, and online classes, they are also a kind of changes that was deconstructed, and it was moving towards a reconstruction phase. So thank you, sir, and thank you so much for your research analysis, that you are doing this research and you have been putting a lot of effort in doing this. I think we are really privileged, and thank you, sir, for being here and giving your valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nupur. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I would like to know a little bit more about the intellectual perception. Yeah. Those people are working on particular community engagement in terms of public intellectuality or in terms of so-called intellectuality. Many people are doing so many good research in academic field, but nobody bothering about the activist per se. Those are doing activism. And what is the gap between particular academia and activism world? And how could we meet the challenges of 21st century's globe, what we facing today, in terms of empirical analysis? Many academicians are going to do and conduct research in field, and they are, just doing it for sake of Facebook kind of promotion, without knowing much details or much grounded works. Rather, the activism, those are engaging their ideas in terms of so many time, particularly in community engagement, what we call it the decolonizing methodology. The Eurocentric nation and this Americanization theory always impose very pathetic ethos on these particular communities engagement. How do you look, and what your research suggests for their future engagement and future abilities per se, particularly in the domain of pedagogical practice or in the domain of actonological contest, more even epistemological violence? How do you look?
Okay, I am not sure that I have an answer for the entire question. Thank you, because it's a very interesting and a very very important point for every intellectual doing research. Of course, if you want to be serious intellectual and you want to do serious research, it's a very articulate question. If I understand, your question is about
yes, sir, definitely,
how to promote an action of justice with your intellectual research,
right?
Avoiding to divide them, to keep them divided, but trying to combining them, isn't it?
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. I give you my personal answer. Actually, my activity of research is very, very intense. So I am not very familiar with the life of political life in the sense of political activism. It is not my best practice in this sense. But I think that the main field, the main situation in which my research becomes something that smells like activism, it's a form of activism, it's in the way in which I make lessons to my students. In which sense? The lesson of philosophy in my field, of course, of any kind of lesson, of course, can be a vertical moment in the sense that someone who knows, myself, the teacher, gives to the students something that they don't know yet. So there is a higher, upper level of the classroom, of the transmission, with the lower level of the students. This situation of with a hierarchical structure is one of the main situation in which deconstruction and generativity works, in my opinion. Why? I can understand a lesson in this way, in the sense I speak, you write. I speak, and at the exam, you will repeat more or less, hopefully, what I said, and I will be happy. And you will have a high note, an A, for example, A plus or whatever, and I will be happy. This is a very old scheme. This is a very old scheme. In my personal experience, I try to create a sort of activism in the pedagogy that I use in the lessons, in the sense that I try to put all the students in the presence of the author, in the situation of the authors, trying not to think about the author, but to think with the author. Be in presence of him, trying to understand his personality, his logic, his way of understanding situation. And when I used to explain Aristotle, Kant, Habermas, or whatever ethical topic, I try to put the students in the situation of making use of the concept. How? I don't only ask them to study on manuals. They are important, of course. We cannot renounce to books in a certain sense. We have to continue the research and writing and to developing ideas and sharing ideas, and it's okay. But according to the main ideas of any theoretical approach, I try to put them in a simple situation. For example, there are ethical cases in which they ask them to use their intelligence to thinking, I don't know how to translate, in an Aristotelian way. If you were Aristotle, how could you solve that situation in terms of aims and means to join these aims? So try to distinguish these elements to the story of Mary that is coming to you asking for help because she is not so sure about the choice of university, of choice of competencies. She doesn't know if she's better for her to go to study. And so building science competencies, technical knowledge or whatever, and the title, the academical degree, or she's upset because on the other side, her parents is pushing her to go to work immediately. So if you were Kant, what could you say about that? And if you were Aristotle, what could you say about that? If you were in the generative thinking, what could you say about the situation? Each ethical approach puts light on different elements and puts accents, stresses some different elements. I think that a new pedagogy is a way to create a different shape of the mind. So this is the point of my activism, where I have access to the intelligence of my students. And reciprocally, because of course, they used to raise problems that normally in the formulation of my ethical theory, okay, in my personal comprehension of Kant, in my personal comprehension of my authors. So I'm sorry, those are just names for making examples, so no more. But sometimes their reactions, their observations makes me having a better understanding of what I'm doing. It's not strictly policy. A political activism is not something very that attracts attention, but I think it's a place that has a political and social meaning. So the policy makers and the social interpreters are not just outside in the public square, in the public squares, making topics, conferences or whatever, or revendicating any kind of social justice. It's okay. So I have personally no objection about this way of doing. But I think that is much less apparent when you are in a classroom and you are building the future and a different mind in a very, very silent shape. That maybe no one will be aware of that, but I believe a lot in that. I believe a lot in that. So that's why my field of action is not always the research, so the speech, the conferences like this one, like public topics or whatever, public publications, books, articles on all the issues that you know, videos now, they are very common. There is a way of dealing with people that enable them to have a different comprehension of the situation. I think this is very generative, and the generative theory pushes me to go in that direction. That's what I can share to you, Bikram. Thank you for the. Hopefully, it's meaningful for you. That's what I do.
Thank you so much, sir, for very wonderful given your answer. With this critical note, I would like to know a little bit more, because after a long time we are interacting and listening you.
Yeah.
And sir, how do you look when somebody very seriously doing research on living agencies, particular on human, when we are living in a planetary perspective? That what about trees? What about these mosquitoes? What about animals? In terms of these capture kind of theories like doctrine of equality and public trust doctrine. How the day will come, we are going on the path of ethos like equality, liberty, and fraternity. When you rightly mentioned about your presentation, the social stigma, when institutional almost finished here, and when the deconstructing of all the societal values in terms of family values first, how these particular AI and machine learning, artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of things always try to impose on us very aspects and materialistic world. How do you look? And what is your observation as a fantastic researcher of 21st century globe? How do you look at these issues?
I think I've not well understood your point. Can you summarize? Sorry, I've
Okay.
The connection, the transmission is not always perfect, so I've lost some. Can you excuse me?
Okay.
If you can repeat in few words your point.
How do you look the particular public trust doctrine and doctrine of equality in terms of liberty, equality, and fraternity? And the submission adding another more, how about your observations in terms of these living agencies? Everybody talking about human perspective of this planetary question. Nobody answer and nobody bothering about the trees, the animals, and other living agencies. Those are also, those are also our partners in the planetary and in the Earth perspective. What is your suggestion, sir?
I see. Thank you. Now. Okay. Excuse me.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Here again, I share my perspective on that issue. I can give you, in a certain sense, a little good news about that. Well, it's of course in the field of researches and of intellectual reflection, so it's not a universal good news in all possible level. Any case, a thinker like Hans Jonas, it's a Jew, a Jewish thinker born at the beginning of the 20th century. So he crossed both wars. And finally, after the Second World War, he went to the United States to end his life there. And he's built up an important reflection about responsibility. The first step of the theory of the responsibility of Hans Jonas says the following, in the sense, there is a huge and important criticism about all the ancient sociological, philosophical and ethical theories, because they were indebted only with an anthropocentrism, only the good in terms of human being. And so the question of Hans Jonas, this German thinker, what about animals? What about nature? What about environment? What about ecology and so on? What about non-human realities of the world? Do they have rights? Can they have attention as we have? The same attention as we have, as we give to each other? Or they have to remain in a secondary plan in our ethical reflection? The answer of Jonas, of course, is to say, no, they need to be part of our ethical reflection. And I think those were the years in which this important group, maybe 10 years later, in the outcome of the theory of responsibility, it's a book in the middle of the 70s, it came out. 10 years later, in Europe, in Switzerland, the Swiss government gave birth to a panel, an international panel about climate change. So they started to create, to invent a methodology about that could give a global perspective of environmental changes. It's a very difficult because it was the first time the question about universalism here as an argument in contra, as an opposite argument about what I just said before. But anyway, it's a way to say how any kind of natural species interact in our world, in our natural world, in order to understand and to acknowledge, to recognize how human action provoked the global the climate crisis that we are crossing now. So maybe you are following. I'm not very familiar with that kind of meeting of theme for the moment, at least. But there are a lot of international important meetings that, according to the reports formulated by this IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change, .ch from Switzerland, that used to receive this kind of reports and to transform them in a public policy. Almost always there are representatives of each state, of each state, no, it's too much, of the greatest state of the G20, for example, at least, used to be present at this kind of meeting, trying to sign agreements to reduce the emissions of CO2, carbon emission, or something like this. This is a way in which the equality, liberty, and fraternity is acknowledged in a certain sense to the all natural realities. In the sense, yes, of course, I use to call brother or sisters, of course, a human being. But let us remember, for example, that in Catholic tradition that I know better than others, in Catholic tradition, someone like Saint Francis of Assisi in the 30th century, so 7 centuries ago, more or less, used to call his brother, a wolf, his sister, the moon. Natural realities, in the sense fraternity can be shared not only with human beings, but must be shared also with the natural realities. This kind of speech of St. Francis, maybe you have heard about that, has been retaken by Pope Francis, actually, in the encyclical letter Laudato Si, which was the title of a writing of St. Francis, in which he tries to upgrade the thinking of St. Francis to the entire church. of course, is not always a satisfactory answer, because exploitation continues, colonization in a certain sense is not completely over, but there are a lot of popping community that are raising now, that used to incarnate, that are trying to incarnate this message in order to be more inclusive in terms of equality, liberty, and fraternity to human beings, of course, because there are the important issue of migration, but also vis-a-vis the natural reality. I don't know if I answered the.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Very informative and very conductive and very organizing answer given by you. I don't want to waste much time of yours, sir. You already spent more than 1.40 minutes. Is very important. Yeah, very important for us. Yes. Anybody, if have any question, please go and ask direct to sir. Direct to sir. Before, I would like to invite Rudran Das for the formal vote of thanks, sir. Thank you so much for connecting with us from the far from Paris. And it's really very wonderful and enlightening session given by you, sir. And looking for future engagement also. And it's my formal and very kind-hearted invitation for you, sir. Please visit once India. We'll put together on the encountering on Niyamgiri issues. And looking forward for future engagement, and have a nice day, sir. And namaste from India, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Bikram, and to you all for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jena, for inviting me for the formal vote of thanks and conclude the session. I'd like to thank everyone to help me putting this conference together. First of all, my big thank to our speaker today, Professor Emanuele. Thank you very much for your contributions and time. Your lectures should be very much emphasize our society and how we regenerate our customs, our values, and traditions. Definitely, your deliverance will be help our researchers, students, especially civil society members. Thank you so much for connecting with us. I have to acknowledge the institutional contribution here, in particular the Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, and Ravenshaw University. My special thanks to our patrons, Professor Sanjay Kumar Nayak, Professor Dr. S.K. Palita, and Professor Mahadev Joyswal, and the convener, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and Charudot Panigrai, for their motivation and support. Special mention to Dr. Vikram Kesari Jena, Director, Center for ADIVASI Research and Development, Dr. Nupur Patnaik, Dr. Shubham Das, for helping me to carry forward this session. And thank you very much the entire team of Center for ADIVASI Research and Development, Professor Srinivasulu NS, Professor V.C. Das, Professor Loknath Misra, Dr. Nupur Patnaik, Professor Samuel Lima, Professor Kamal Prasad Mohanty, Shubham Das, Chinmay Kumar Sahu, and everyone who are connected with us and helping to organize such kind of intellectual gathering, and especially our audiences from Facebook and YouTube, and who are here to listen us. Thank you all for a patient hearing. Thank you. The meeting is concluded.
Thank you.